Anyone's here yet. I don't know if anyone's in the room. I think there are a couple of people here. Let me know in the comments. So I meant to do this landscape because I would assume they break. So it's a big time commitment. And then Technofiber Razor Soft and Technofiber Razor Code and RPM Blast. The thing is, you haven't seen a lot of string reviews is because number one, I don't get these strings for free. I have to pay for them, which I don't like spending a ton of money. You might think I make all the money back on views on YouTube. I do not. My channel doesn't get tremendous amount of views. So doing string reviews in particular that only get a few, anywhere from 2 to 10,000 views, that doesn't pay for the string. And it takes a lot of work and time and effort to do an in-depth string review like I do. So if you want me to do more string reviews, again, because they take so much time, I would please ask you to buy me a coffee or go to the Buy Me a Coffee link to buy me a set of strings. And you don't have to buy a full set of strings. So if you want me to do these future string reviews, I just don't want to come out of pocket with hundreds and hundreds of dollars to do the string reviews, not get my money back, and spend all that time and effort. So I would appreciate it for anyone that wants to help me do the string reviews. You don't have to buy me a whole set of strings. Just if you want to donate $3 or $5, and that will accumulate between many different people, and then I'll continue to do the string reviews. Otherwise, I'll continue to do them as well, but they're just going to be at a slower pace just because it takes so much time, effort, and money. And yeah, that's sort of my spiel regarding the string reviews. So welcome, Susan. I see a couple comments. Nick Kerr, welcome Nick Kerr and Susan. Thanks for joining the feed. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So again, if you want to help me do string reviews, more string reviews, and keep the cadence up, anything I can do to help contribute, anything you can do to help contribute to those string reviews, that would be awesome. So, and again, if you're just joining, please subscribe on the other platform, TT. I don't know if I should even say it because who knows if YouTube does anything with their algorithm, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's going to be TikTok because TikTok allows live guests. So if I do streams in the future, once I have enough followers on TikTok, I can do live guest streams, which is much more engaging than me just talking to a camera and having to look down at this live chat to see what people are doing or what people are saying. So starting the mains on this racket, I am using my normal. This is my gravity. I have a couple of rackets to string over there, or I should say my son has a couple rackets to string over there. This is my Head Gravity MPL that's customized. So it's an MPL, which means the MP light, but it has a lot of weight in the handle. And this one is actually quite heavy and doesn't have any lead. It's about 318 on the swing weight. And I'm using my normal Kirschbaum Super Smash, which is pretty much my personal favorite string to use on a regular basis. I also love Head Lynx Tour, but that string is really stiff, plays great, plays amazing, but it can be a little hard on the arm. So doing the mains here and getting started. And again, if you can let me know, okay, cool, Chester, you said you're on the phone. So that works out well for you. If you're on TV and it's not landscape, that's obviously problematic. So anybody watching, if you can tell me if you're on your phone or if you're on a TV application, that way in the future, I know if I should be doing these live streams in horizontal mode or in vertical mode. So as more and more people join, that's awesome. Now let's talk about, if you want to talk about any particular issue, please let me know in the chat. I'm going to start off going through Alcaraz and Sinner. So even though they haven't played since the US Open, and I want to recap my predictions. So they've played 5 times over the course of 2025. They played at Rome, they played in the French Open, they played in the Wimbledon finals, they played in the Cincinnati finals, and they played at the US Open finals. So in terms of what I thought would happen, my predictions on these two guys of who was going to win at any given time was pretty good. I think my record was quite good. So at Rome, I said that Alcaraz would win, and he did. At the French Open, I also chose Alcaraz to win that match, and he did as well, even though I probably should have been wrong because Sinner should have won that match because he had 3 match points. So you could say he could have won it, even though Alcaraz played amazing. At Wimbledon final, I predicted that Sinner would win, and I was right there. So at that time, I was 3-0. And then it came to Cincinnati. At Cincinnati, Sinner withdrew because he was ill, and that was obviously not very, I can't predict if someone's going to get injured or be ill. So at that point, after Cincinnati, I was sort of 3-1, but I will toss that out the window. And then at the U.S. Open, I predicted, well, I actually didn't predict. I thought it was a toss-up, and I literally did a coin flip, and the coin flip said Sinner. But I wasn't confident in that at all. I thought it was 50-50. But on that one, I would have been wrong anyway. That was a clear beatdown for these two guys, considering these two guys, how they play each other. The U.S. Open was relatively a beatdown, and it sent a message that Alcaraz definitely has Sinner's number and is the player to beat right now. And he showed that again recently, that it looks like if these two guys meet right now, Alcaraz, I think, is the clear favorite. So after the U.S. Open, Sinner talked about having to improve and having to make changes. And he talked about his serve and other aspects, because he was, and thanks for all the, don't change my name to Sanic. Hey, TK, no questions now. Just enjoy listening to you talk about tennis gear. Thank you very much. On desktop, cool. Thanks for letting me know on your desktop, so that would be better for being horizontal. Then Sean says, I have a drop weight machine, so much work than your machine. Yeah, drop weights take a lot more effort, and if it's a drop weight that doesn't have a freestanding, so a freestanding machine makes things so much easier, right? Because you're just much more comfortable. You're not bending over a table if you have your drop weight machine on a table. If you have a freestanding machine, of course, that makes it a lot nicer. But once you have it, if you have enough room and enough space to have a stand-up machine, that's the way to go 100%. But not everybody has that space. So that makes it difficult. And then, of course, the drop weight machine just takes longer anyway. So I always prefer a good crank machine because they're just so durable. I mean, these things are bulletproof. Nothing happens to these machines. This one is 35 years old, has strung anywhere between 10 and 15,000 rackets, used to string on the futures and for various lower level professionals. And this string has been everywhere across the country, not only in my homes, but also on when I was younger and I was playing a little bit more on the tournament circuit. So this machine has been just so bulletproof, and it is calibrated to be 2 pounds higher than normal, just so that it sort of mimics the machines like a electronic tensioner or electronic tensioner head machine. You can buy the Wise electronic tensioning head for these types of machines. But I want nothing to do with electronic tensioner, just because it really doesn't do anything more accurate. You have to plug it in. It's a little bulkier. It can break. So no thanks. I like simplicity. I like things that are durable. And I will take a good stringer on not such a good machine any day over a bad stringer with a super high quality machine, or let's say an expensive machine. Any day of the week, go with the stringer that has experience and attention to detail over someone that's just using a fancy machine that you think might be better that's actually not better. So I know I went off a tangent a little bit from the Alcaraz and Sinner discussion. Let me look at the comments again. I have a basic kipper mate. I used to pay attention to the kipper mates. Thanks, Sean. Made in the US. Do you like it? Is it a pain in the ass, or is it actually pretty good? Let me know, because they were really popular back in the 80s and 90s as well. They were sort of the go-to machine. Can this weapon kill people? Chuckles or chungles. That's funny. I don't know. It's not that heavy, so it can't fall on you. But who knows? Yeah. So anyways, talking about Alcaraz and Sinner again, or changing topics back to them as I wait for more chat comments, is Sinner said he was going to make a lot of improvements or look to make improvements. So the question is, between the end of the US Open and now, has Sinner made a lot of improvements? And you've seen him in practice. If you've been paying attention, you've seen him working on his serve, and you can see some slight attempts to make changes on his serve. And I've always said that I've never really loved Sinner serve. He's so great at holding serve because he backs up his serve so well. But his serve in general has always been a manufactured serve. It's not something that's as fluid and natural like his forehands or his backhands. But his serve and his volleys are sort of manufactured and sort of forced. And he's never had a serve like a lot of the top servers. He's just backed it up incredibly well. So you have to ask yourself, is the serve enough? Like, is the serve the problem from not being able to beat Alcaraz? Now, if he did improve his serve, it's true. Maybe he would get broken less by Alcaraz. But Alcaraz is all over Sinner's serve when he wants to be. And I don't think the serve is enough because you always have a lot of pressure on your serve to hold games. Now, when it's against anybody else other than Alcaraz, Sinner plays his best tennis when he's facing break points. But Alcaraz is just another beast altogether. And I don't think any serve improvements is going to be enough. And so far, what I've seen sort of in this, the end of the year season, I don't see Sinner making any other changes. And you should see those changes against other players. And I would say that while the serve is really important, and obviously he needs to hold more and maybe get to more tiebreakers and then hope to win more tiebreakers against Alcaraz. But I don't, there's definitely confidence that comes from serving better. But when it comes to Alcaraz, he's not going to have to just serve better to get that confidence. He's going to need to hit the ball off the ground, not better, but with more variety. And this is the big problem. Hey, Pam, how are you? Thanks for joining. I think he's going to need to hit with more variety, and I have not seen anything from Sinner about hitting with more variety. And what do I mean by more variety? Sinner loves to crack the ball. It's a very consistent ball. A lot of people play well against him or hit the ball well against him. The outcomes may not be that great, but if you've noticed lately, even with Altmaier today and Adamaier, is it Atmaier? Atmaier. A couple days ago, these guys are challenging Sinner, and it's because he hits such a consistent, clean ball, and that's his MO, right? That's his motive. That's Sinner's motive. He likes to sort of blow people off the court, and he used to be able to do that at times, depending on the court condition, with Alcaraz as well. But Alcaraz has gotten much better competing, going toe-to-toe with Sinner on the ground strokes. And the way that Sinner's going to have to adjust his game, it's not going to be serving and volleying. That's not going to be enough because Sinner's just not a natural serve and volleyer or not a natural volleyer. So he's never going to have that elite level volley. At least I don't think so. I think it's pretty much impossible. And he's going to will he have an elite level serve, not just backing up his serve incredibly well? Maybe, but I don't think that's enough. So Sinner's going to have to learn to have more variety, and he's going to have to employ that against more players and every other player he's playing against. So what do I mean by that? And it's got to be the ball with more topspin into the corners that bounces higher and stretches people out and makes them hit at shoulder level. Because even at the pro level, those shots are a little bit more uncomfortable, even though they can hit them incredibly well. And so can Alcaraz. Let's say a high backhand. But can you do it over the course of 2 out of 3 sets or 3 out of 5 sets? That's where it gets harder and it gets frustrating. If Sinner hits the same kind of ball and going toe-to-toe against Alcaraz, that's a very comfortable place to be in. Maybe not for a lot of other players, but it's still, even for them, it's more comfortable because you know what you're going to get. And Sinner's going to have to change and evolve to give some more variety. So higher shots to the forehand and to the backhand that force people to hit more at shoulder height more often, and then mix it in with the driving. If he doesn't do that, I think Alcaraz is going to win the Australian Open because his motive is known, and Alcaraz can hang in there. Not just hang in there, he can put Sinner on the defense. So going this part of the year, Sinner's working on his serve, but the question is he working on variety? In his matches that he's played so far, the answer to that is obviously absolutely not. And that's concerning because I want to see these two guys compete and have a true rivalry where each guy can win. And you don't want one guy just dominating. And right now, I don't know the exact head-to-head record, but obviously Alcaraz's head-to-head record against Sinner in the last few years is very favorable to Alcaraz. And I would like to see Sinner win more. I am more of a Sinner fan than I am an Alcaraz fan. But Alcaraz is a stud right now. He is playing great. He has all the answers. He's playing consistent against everybody. And I think if he faces Sinner again, I just don't see Sinner having any answers to beat Alcaraz, at least not yet. And these aren't answers that you just develop in a week or two. You have to practice them throughout the tournaments. You have to employ different tactics against a little bit lesser opponents, and you can see if it works, because you just can't go into a match against Alcaraz and expect you're going to come up with a new strategy and only use it for Alcaraz. I think that's foolish. I think you need to practice it in order to be able to employ it under the most pressure situations, and that's against Carlos. All right, let's read a few comments. Pam, so what does he have to do? I think I addressed that, Pam. More variety. Do I think Sinner is not as good? That's a tough question. At this moment, I think Alcaraz is better because he's always had more variety, right? Alcaraz has always had more options, but Sinner has always had more consistent domination from the baseline, backhand and forehand. Alcaraz's weak spot used to be his setup backhand. Like when he got set up to hit a backhand, it was less effective. It wasn't a weakness, but it wasn't elite. Now it's getting to a point where it's pretty elite. So he can beat Sinner from the ground going toe-to-toe, which is something that he used to not be able to do. Plus, he has all the options, depending on the court surface, whether it's the drop shots or the high variety balls. And this plays on a person's ego or psyche when they're in the middle of a match. Just like at Wimbledon, Alcaraz did not look like himself, you could say, at Wimbledon. And Sinner clearly had the edge at Wimbledon. Sorry, not Wimbledon, it's Wimbledon, as many people point out, but being from the Northeast, we all often say Wimbledon. So at Wimbledon, and that wasn't because Alcaraz was sick or not feeling well. He just didn't feel like he had any answers. So it was a confidence thing. And when you don't have your confidence, it's harder to give your 100%. You just feel defeated. And while these guys are world-class athletes and they really don't get that same level of feeling defeated as like a recreational player will, you could actually see it in Alcaraz that he just felt like he had no answers to Sinner. And that was because of confidence. He lost confidence throughout that match. And it's not to say he couldn't have won that match, but it's harder when you feel like you're on the defense in the match and you feel like someone's on top of you, sort of dictating play, then it's harder to come up with solutions. And that's how Sinner is going to be with Alcaraz right now. He doesn't have any solutions for Alcaraz, and he needs to find some. And they are there, but you have to practice them. And I don't see him practicing it. And again, maybe he's doing it on the side, but again, you should be able to see this in a match when he's playing against Altmaier or Atman. Altmaier played an amazing match with him because he knows exactly what he's going to get from Sinner. And that's never good, right? As two people playing one another, the person that's a little more unpredictable has an advantage. When you're predictable and you know it's coming, then you don't have to rely on anticipation as much or being surprised by certain shots because you know what you're going to get. So it's just easier to hit a shot when you know what you're going to get. I mean, that's really basic stuff, right? So, does Sinner understand what you were saying, Lou? Thanks, Pam, for jumping in there. Agree, Sinner might take losses to improve his skill set to compete with Alcaraz. Yeah, I don't even know if he has to take losses, right? He's so much better. Not so much better, but better enough where... But you're probably right. He needs to commit to doing certain things. And even in the tightest moments, even if he ends up losing, that might be a good thing. You could say Alcaraz was doing the same thing last year, but I think he was just burnt out. But yeah, whether it means a loss or not, he needs to come up with a different strategy. It has to be something more than just improving the serve. While that will definitely help, you get a lot of confidence from holding serve, and Sinner does need that confidence holding serve because Alcaraz is all over Sinner's serve in most games, and it's really hard for Sinner to hold easily in most games, and that's a problem. So it is good to see they're working on that, but I still don't think it'll be enough. Now, who am I? You know, he's got a smart team. Sinner is very smart, very reflective, very self-aware. That's the word I'm looking for. He's very self-aware. But when you have a motive and a style of play which is highly offensive and not a lot of variety, you can wonder, it's not that easy to make that change. Some changes are easier than others. This one is very much certainly capable of, but it requires commitment. You know, I always talk about Coco Golf a lot too. So I usually talk about some of the most popular players or people I feel that aren't living up to their potential, and Coco is one of those players. And she has a problem where she has a clear technical problem with her stroke mechanics. And most of the time, or her approach to hitting the ball, stroke mechanics themselves can take a long time to fix, but how you approach hitting the ball does not take as long, and it's much easier to fix. So like with Coco's issue, and I've been pretty clear on those issues on previous videos, her issues can be, at least 80% of them, can be fixed much easier than some really deep stroke mechanics that Coco also has. But then like what Sinner has as well, these aren't stroke mechanic issues. This is more strategy. But he has to be used to hitting more of these driving topspin loopy balls to the forehand and backhand on Alcaraz. You know, drop shots aren't going to do it. Volleys aren't going to do it, because whatever Sinner can do a little bit better on drop shots and volleys, Alcaraz can do better. So the only two areas where Sinner has the advantage in the future is he's taller, so he should be able to serve better. But Alcaraz's movement on the return and his ability to return and his speed is just so neutralizing. It's incredible. So that won't be enough alone. And that's why it has to come down to the ground strokes and the confidence you get during the ground strokes. All right, thanks for, so we got a few people in here and some more chats. Why don't you call Sinner's coach about mixing it up? I don't know if you're being sarcastic, like, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. These guys are much smarter than you. Yeah, that's fine. You can, if you're being sarcastic, Pam. I can't tell if you're not. But of course, I don't have Darren Cahill's number on speed dial. And he, you know, they got a really smart team. I'm sure they thought about these things. Maybe they have a different plan. We won't know until the Australian Open. We really won't know entirely. So this is one guy on the outside that's been around tennis for a long time, just giving my observations and opinions. Could they be wrong? They could be. They might have a better plan, but I'd really like to know what it is, because tennis is not that complex when it comes to strategy. There's just a series of things that you can do in changing strategy. There's some slight tweaks and changes that you continually make, but it's not highly, highly complex like some other sports that are just a little bit more, you know, it's very nuanced in tennis. And in other sports, there can be like take football, for instance, it's more like a chess match. There's coaching can have an enormous impact on a game in football, but in tennis, coaching can have some impact. But if the strategy is wrong, or you're using a strategy and it's not working, there's just there's not too many options that someone has. So anyway, by the way, if you missed my opening, if you haven't followed me on TikTok, please do so, because I'd love to do some more live streams on TikTok, because you can add guests onto the streams and you can communicate in two-way instead of me having to look down at the chats like I am now to see what comments are. You know, I think it's just more conversational if I had people joining alive on TikTok versus on YouTube here. So anyway, finishing up the racket. So that must mean the live is going well. Normally it only takes me 12, 14 minutes to do a racket. I've probably been on here at least 20 minutes because I'm getting distracted. Hopefully I don't make any mistakes, but I don't think so. After 10,000 rackets or more, you tend not to make too many mistakes unless you're completely out of it. So like I said earlier, this is Kirschbaum Super Smash. It's sort of my go-to string. Doesn't have the greatest longevity, but it's pretty good longevity. And because I string often, it doesn't really matter to me personally. And it's such a budget-friendly and a value-oriented string that has such great performance. It's why I just keep coming back to it. But again, if you are watching and you want me to do more string reviews, because string reviews are sort of the foundation of this channel. They always have been, even though I do instruction things and talk about predictions and the Pro Tour and things of that nature. I always view the bedrock of this channel is my string reviews because I consider them very in-depth and I have a very detailed process and I enjoy doing them, but they don't get a lot of views necessarily. They certainly don't pay for themselves and they don't pay for the time and the effort to play with a particular string for 6 to 8 hours. And then plus making the videos and making the graphics and all that stuff. So this is the last tie off. And then I probably will run out of things to talk about. I really just did this live just because I want to get more comfortable doing lives and see if people will join, which was cool that some people did. So thank you, Pam. Thank you, Chester. Thank you, Sean, for leaving the comments. Don't change my name to Sanic. That was an earlier comment. And it looks like there's 26 people in here right now. So I'm just finishing up the string job on my Gravity MPL. And so who had the drop weight machine again? So if you had the drop weight, the Kipper mate, he's probably gone from this. Oh, there's a question. So Fusion 2.0. Hello, I just wanted to ask why Nadal has such a bad matchup for Djokovic on hard courts and why it seemed like Nadal didn't try to change tactics and counter him. Well, Nadal has had the most spin-oriented strokes. And spin can definitely push people back on the right courts. But on hard courts, spin is less effective. So you're talking about on Nadal, in order to beat Novak in the past on hard court, is Novak was just better at driving the ball on a more consistent basis, had a great strategy, being able to serve with incredible precision. And Nadal really couldn't hit or hurt Djokovic enough because just like Alcaraz's sliding backhand, that sliding backhand that Novak has, just like Carlos has, was just such a game changer for both of these guys because when you can slide into your backhand like those two guys can, and Sinner does as well, but he's a little taller and lankier. But those, when you can do that and you can get that extra reach on your backhand, even with a two-handed backhand, you can slide into it, you've automatically shrunk that court. And now that Nadal had so much spin on the ball and he wasn't able to drive the ball through the court as much like Novak could, and Novak was the best mover in the world at that time, it was a really hard matchup on hard courts and even on grass courts. It favored Novak. And you're asking Nadal to hit through the court more often, which is not how his MO. When you talk about motives and game styles, just like we were talking about Sinner having, a game style that's designed to blow people off the court, but then he meets someone like Alcaraz that he can't blow off the court. What is he supposed to do? That's not an easy change because that's how they play the sport. And when it came to Nadal and Novak, Nadal played the sport through like a war of attrition. And with Novak, he met someone that was just as good in physical shape, was as fast, maybe even faster, and moved through the ball, specifically on the backhand side, better than Nadal even did, and was able to drive the ball through the court better than Nadal. So that was just ended up being a bad matchup because how do you change your game style? That wasn't much of a strategy thing. There wasn't a lot of things that Nadal could have done strategy-wise to counter what Novak brought to the table in that era. which is just 5 years ago. So that's what I think about that. That's not that easy. All right, thanks, Pam. You said you were not being sarcastic. Okay, I wasn't sure. You know, sometimes I have to try and read through the chats to see if someone is being sarcastic, but you know, I'm just a tennis pundit on YouTube. I certainly don't know everything. I have my opinions and observations, and I think they make sense. But until I was on, if I was being on a podcast with Sinner or Darren Cahill, maybe they would be able to enlighten me a little bit on some of the things that they are doing. But I do have a lot of trust in Sinner's team. They have to know this. Now, again, tennis is not that complicated, but maybe for some reason they're not ready to work on that variety yet. Maybe they haven't recognized it yet, which would be really surprising. I think they have to recognize it. I mean, again, it's not that complex. He's got a great team. Now, with saying that, not everybody, even the top pros, have coaches that I think are all that bright. Tennis culture in general, even on the pro tour, has a certain way of doing things, and it's not always the most evolved, let's say, or the most informed, or the most, tennis players. There's a lot of tennis players that still have adolescent brains, and that includes some of the coaches that have a certain philosophy and a certain way of doing things. And I think sometimes they miss the obvious. They've just been on tour too long with too many players. There are some brilliant coaches. I think that Alcaraz and Sinner both have two of the best coaches out there. I've seen other pros where I've watched them practice. I've watched their coaches, and their light bulbs aren't that bright. There are quite a few of them. You'd be surprised where they just have a way of doing things. They're just going through the motions, right? It's not easy being on tour, even for the coaches. And you know what your players can and can't do. And you also have to deal with players who are basically the bosses, right? They're paying for the coaches. So there's a weird dynamic in tennis where in pro sports like team sports, where you have the coaches that are paid by the organization and the general managers, they can have oftentimes more forthright conversations with each other because the players aren't paying them. In tennis, it's very strange. I think you have to walk a fine line, and it's all about how you create the relationships. And in tennis, if you're a coach and you think you're going to upset your player and your player is stubborn, or maybe the player's parents are involved and they have certain beliefs and they've been guiding their kids through the tour for a long time and as junior players and so forth. And then you get this outsider, is viewed as an outsider, even though he's on your team and he's a coach. You're paying that coach. He's not part of the family. The family has very strong opinions. You can take like Leila Fernandez, for example, and so many others, just one that comes to the top of my head, where there's so much influence by the family that they're not willing to go outside certain parameters. And that means the coaches may be reluctant to really push for something. So this may not be also just a coaching issue. This is a dynamic in tennis that's really problematic, because if I was a coach and I would be really blunt like I am now, you might offend some people. And depending on the relationship, it could not survive, because you also have to deal with not just the player. It's not just a player-coach relationship. It should be, like it is with Sinner, his parents stay at a distance, at an arm's length distance, and they don't get involved. And that's much better, because then you have a relationship between coach and player that can develop and become much more honest and forthright. But when the parents are involved, it's like having, in-laws, and you have a marriage, and the marriage might be having problems, and now your in-laws get involved, and it's just like a cancer. And if that person, in the case of tennis, is paying the coach, it's just easier to sometimes say, I don't like what this coach is doing. I don't like the respect this coach is giving me or not giving me, even though coach is always older. And you can just fire them and find somebody else. And that's a dynamic in tennis that really sucks. It's not advantageous to the players to have that dynamic. And it's a shame, because the players are the bosses, but they're young or younger. They don't know as much, and they may not trust many people as much because they're outsiders, even though they're on their team. So I think that's a big problem in tennis, and I think it probably prohibits players from evolving in a way that would normally evolve within a good relationship. Oh, wow, Fusion 2.0, great point. I was going to talk about this anyway, since I'm now done with the racket. Nice clean racket. Got to clip off this one right here, and then it's done. And clip off at the bottom, and I'll be done with this. But Zverev, man, I really want to like Sasha as a person, even though he comes with a lot of baggage and very strong opinions. But sometimes he's just an adolescent mindset, or he just doesn't get it. He's one of those players. You can look at Holger Rune as even more dramatic, but Zverev saying that they're slowing down the courts to have more Carlos and Sinner finals. He always has an excuse. I just don't get it. You know, during the US Open, he said he's going to be one of the guys to break up and compete with Sinner and Alcaraz. And he wants to be the guy that, you know, challenges for Grand Slams. But he said it in a much more aggressive way, almost so overconfident, like he believes, which I think was just trying to foreshadow, even though it was falsely foreshadowing, that he can compete with these guys. Instead of saying, hey, these guys are just the best right now, I'm going to do everything I can to try and compete with them. But first, you got to get to the finals, dude. You can't be mouthing off in the quarterfinals or the round of 16 saying you're the guy that can compete with Sinner and Alcaraz. No, you're not. You can't. You haven't showed that you can. Maybe you could if you really buckle down, but it's delusional. He has some delusion, Sasha. And that delusion also comes out when he says something like the tour is slowing down courts in order to have more Alcaraz Sinner finals. I don't know if he really believes that or not. He probably does, but it's most likely it's delusion. Let's say even if they were keeping the courts and the ball slower for a certain style of play, that would favor Carlos a little bit more than Sinner. But if you think that's going to get more finals, I don't know. Who else can compete with these two guys, even if it was on a faster surface? We've played on grass this year. You got the same two guys. So, like, it's completely delusional. It's not true. Or even if it were true, they're trying to slow down the courts. I would argue they're trying to slow down the courts just because longer points tend to be more entertaining. If you remember back in the 90s, some of the big serving points, they were so boring. And a lot of people think today's tennis is boring as well. I get that. But you can't stop these two guys anyway. And it's not going to be the promoters or the tournament directors. The tournament directors do want Sinner Alcaraz finals because why wouldn't you? It brings in more fans. It brings in more everything, brings in more money because of it. So there might be some truth to that. As a tournament director, you do want these two guys to meet in the finals. That might be true. But the claim or blame or be a victim and say it's because of the court conditions, again, some delusion. I really want to like Sasha but he's an elder statesman of the tour right now, but he still acts like an adolescent when he makes some of his comments. He just doesn't get it. But sometimes he's funny, he's witty, and he's an intelligent guy and he's smart. But when it comes to his comments, they're just off base. So that's a good comment, Fusion 2.0. And yeah, so great for leaving those comments. So again, this is only like my second or third or fourth live, and the other ones have been not so great. If you can let me know in the comments again, if you want horizontal lives or vertical lives, just let me know in the comments, vertical, horizontal, and that way I'll know whether to do these lives horizontally or vertically. That's it for today on the live stream. I haven't been that active with my videos, so I wanted to come on and say hello. Keep some random thoughts about strings. Again, if you want to help me do more string reviews, please buy me a string, which is the buy me a coffee link that's in the description. And I do have a video coming up about, I did the video a while ago, so I'll post it soon, about Fonseca and will he ever be able to challenge Sinner and Alcaraz. So I had some thoughts on that. That's coming up next. And then next week, I'm going to do a quick video on the heavy versus light rackets thing. Again, I've done some in the past. A lot of people talk about that issue. It's always a popular issue. But I think I'm going to open up your minds to a whole different way of thinking whether light rackets or heavier rackets are better, because there is no such thing. But there's always an argument that use the heaviest racket that you can handle. And I'm telling you straight out, that is such a problem. That is such a myth, and that you shouldn't buy into that, because there's so many reasons you should think of what does that actually mean. Use the heaviest racket that you can handle comfortably. Does that mean in practice? Does it mean after an hour of play? Does it mean in a match? Does it mean for your forehand or your backhand or your serve? When you're tired, when you're not tired? There's so many problems and so many variables with that thought that people think that using the heavier racket is generally better. And I'm going to tell you why that might be true depending on your style of play, and mass versus speed. And we're going to talk about all those things in an upcoming video that I think I'm going to be able to provide a lot of additional context that no one else has provided on that topic. And it doesn't matter if you're a 3-0 player, 3-5 player, all the way up to a professional player. It's going to be informative. At least I think so. So thanks for watching the live. I'll see you in the next one. I hope to do more lives. Remember, please follow on TikTok, because I'd really like to do some lives in the future there where I can take guest callers and we can have two-way conversations instead of just the chats. But thanks, Chester. Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Fusion. I'll see you soon.